Okay, so yeah, welcome to an introduction to visually impaired boccia with me, with Matt Kendrick, and just a couple of housekeeping bits before we start. If we have mics off, that's great. I know I've fallen victim to it before with my dog starting barking in the middle of a presentation or a course. So yeah, if you could have your microphones off unless contributing, that would be really helpful. If you're comfortable to have your videos on, again, that would be great. Just to be able to see your faces in albeit in a virtual space is really helpful for me and for the group. Can introduce yourselves into the box, into the chat if you want to. I can see your names up on your little screen there, so that's all good. And if you guys are all happy, then we'll make a start. So to start with visually impaired boccia, history or a brief history of, essentially this project started, or this program started back in 2011 because we didn't have a fair way for people with a visual impairment to compete. We weren't able to create a level playing field that meant that people could compete against each other. So there was a project with Loughborough University, which went through developing equipment. We worked with some of the top international referees in the world to develop a set of rules that worked for the sport, and we embedded it into our competition pathway once we had equipment and rules and officials training, which enabled that to happen. So it was a kind of a starting from scratch type project, and we got to a place where now people with a visual impairment can compete. They can compete in the Heathcote Cup using the equipment, which I believe you guys have been provided with as part of the project. Is that right, George? You're on mute.
Sorry, we've been on Zoom for a few years now. You think I know better that everybody should have received their equipment by now. I think it's any Wolverhampton that hasn't got there, but if you haven't received it, let me know and I can take it out for you.
Great. So that equipment is on your way to you. You have, as part of this project, hundreds of pounds worth of equipment that's taken over a decade to develop. So that's a great position to be in. But that's the background broadly. Someone had this idea of how we could do this, and as a governing body, we worked with them to make that a reality. So this is what we're going to run through tonight. We're going to go through who can play visually impaired boccia. We'll talk about what visually impaired boccia actually is and how we play it. And then from a coaching or a leadership perspective, what are some of the adaptive methods that we can use to make sure that people with a visual impairment have a good experience of visually impaired boccia? So we'll rattle through those bits. But again, if you have anything that you want to ask, then please do pop it in the chat. So first of all, what is visual impairment? You guys who are already working with people with visual impairments will likely know these things anyway, but good to set the scene across the board. So sight loss can range from a total loss of sight to a disturbance within the field of vision. And there's obviously a continuum. Some people who have no sight and some people who are partially sighted. From a sporting context, then there are two areas that are assessed in terms of what we call classification. Don't worry about it too much, but it's visual acuity and visual field. And these are things that are assessed when someone comes into para sports or into a sport that is competitive, that has a visually impaired element to it. So again, we're not medical doctors here. We're not trying to be necessarily, unless anybody on the call is, then that's fine. But there's a few diagnoses that someone might, or a few conditions that people might tell you that they have, and just, I guess, to have a bit of an awareness of it. There are a few that are probably more common than others. First one being albinism, so a lack of pigmentation in the skin or the eyes. And again, we relate all of this stuff to what does it mean for the sport of boccia. So bright light can cause discomfort. So if we're setting up a session we might think about playing away from the light as opposed to towards it, for example. Nystagmus is another one, and that's an involuntary moving of the eye, kind of oscillating. And people with nystagmus might struggle to follow a ball. So again, it's about how do we create an environment in our sessions for our users, for our participants who maybe struggle to follow a ball, but making sure they know where the ball has gone. And retinitis pigmentosa is another one. Again, this is not going to be in the quiz, so don't panic about these. But it's a condition that affects both acuity and field, and sometimes referred to as tunnel vision. So again, we're thinking about from a sporting perspective, they might see the balls right in front of them, but they might not see balls towards the sides of the court. So again, anything in here is trying to be related to the sport. One area that some people find challenging sometimes is what sort of terminology to use and what sort of terminology might make people uncomfortable. So yeah, just a few things to be aware of in here. Blind or partially sighted people, people with vision impairment, person with sight loss, visually impaired person, or has an impairment. These are all terms or things that are at the moment due to be deemed to be acceptable. And a few things to try and avoid: blind, handicapped, the disabled, or suffers from. That last one applies that people who have a disability are suffering. That's not the case all the time. So yeah, just a few things to flag there. So the next section for you is who can play. So I've split this into two sections, into recreational and into competitive. So from a recreational perspective, then we're talking about absolutely anybody who is blind or partially sighted or who has a visual impairment of any description. In that setting, then you can have any number of hundreds of weird and wonderful adaptations that can be made to make it appropriate for that player. And I'd encourage anybody to be creative with what some of those solutions may be. In a competitive setting, then these players from a Boccia perspective will fit into a BC7, which is Boccia classification 7. In England, there are 8 classifications. 4 of those are Paralympic pathway, that's BC1 to BC4, and BC5 to BC8 are non-Paralympic pathway, but still within our national pathway and framework. So VI players fit within the BC7 classification within our Heathcote Cup. So players might need to provide evidence of their visual impairments, and British Blind Sport, who is the national disability sports organisation for blind sport in the UK, they have a system whereby they can give a classification of a B1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, depending on the level of impairment. And each one of those B1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 makes somebody eligible to be able to play VI Boccia competitively as a BC7. Are you with me so far? A few people give me a nod if you could. That would be great. I can see some, but not all. So then from a competitive setting, then they'll use a VI Boccia grid. So that's the equipment that you've received, and I can talk through a little bit more about that equipment. Competitively, the sport is always 1 versus 1. Whereas we know in a community setting or in a club setting, you're likely to not just have 2 people, you're potentially going to have a whole room full of people. So we could look at playing pairs or team or bigger than that, potentially from both ends of the court if needed. But competitively is always 1 versus 1. So if any of the players that you guys are working with turn up to a Heathcote Cup, it won't be team, it will be individual play. And competitively, all VI Boccia players wear eye shades, and that's to standardize the level of sight. And so people who wear eye shades will be able to use the tactile grid, to use the VI Boccia grid, which will help them to make their decisions on court. So yeah, 2 sides to this coin. One is recreational. They can do as a leader, as a coach, we can create a situation that works for your player, either through noise cues or through contrasting colors, whatever is required. Competitively, though, we try and stick as close as possible to the rules, which are designed by World Boccia, but adapted by us for people with visual impairments. Okay, so a little bit about the VI Boccia grid. So give me a wave if you guys have seen your VI Boccia grid you've been provided with and have had a little play around with it. Give me a wave. Keep on waving as I scroll down. If you have seen it and had a look at it, great. I'm scrolling through. Fantastic. Awesome. That looks like pretty much everyone. So you'll notice that on your VI Boccia grid, then you have boxes, you have squares. Now each one of those squares on the court represents 1 meter squared. And this is a handheld, scaled down version of the boccia court. Now the boccia court being a 6 meter wide playing area by 10 meters long, that gives us all the squares being 1 meter to try and help the player to decide how far away from them the ball is on the court. You'll see the big pegs on the picture in front of you. There's a big red smooth peg, and there's a big blue rough peg. Those represent the players. That's where they're sat in an individual match in their box, inside their 1 meter by 2.5 meter throwing box. Red is always on the right as the referee looks at it, and you'll see that, yeah, that's one of the rules we try and keep the same. The smaller textured pegs on the courts are to represent the jack ball. Now, the jack ball is taller, it's higher than the rest of the pegs, so it stands out when you run your hand over it. The red pegs, again, are smooth and represent where the red balls have gone, and the blue pegs are rough and represent where the blue pegs have gone. Some people that we've done this with have likened it a little bit to battleships. I'd like to think it's a little bit more sporting and advanced than battleships, perhaps, but a similar concept. And we tried to put as many peg holes as possible into this board so that we can be as accurate as possible where those balls are on the court, and they should represent where those balls are. So yeah, each of the balls feels different to touch, and you'll see that see how the pegs are set up on that board. That's how I would suggest you start a match if you're playing 1 versus 1, where all of the pegs representing the balls are behind the player, and the player sitting at the front of the box. We want the player to be as close as possible to the target, but within their box. Sports assistants. This is a big part of Boccia, especially in the BC1 and BC3 classifications. It's the same in BC7. So you have sports assistants that will stand behind the player, looking at the court. These are sighted people who are able to then plot where the pegs go, where the balls go on the court, and place them in the relevant position onto the court with as great a level of accuracy as possible. Quite a few people that have tried this have found it tricky to start with, but like with anything in sport, the more you practice, the more you do it, the better you become. And that's the message, really. And again, competitively, then we'd have our sports assistants standing behind the player, not interfering in a match setting. They're not there to coach. They're not there to instruct. They're there to provide provide the grid when it's asked for by the players. Obviously, in a coaching or in a community style session, then sports assistants can get involved and they can help guide and coach and do whatever they need to. But from competition perspective, this is what you would see: 1 player, 1 sports assistant stood behind the box, 1 each. So players interpret the position of the ball on courts. And you see the young man with his hand on the board here. He's wearing eye shades. I think that this guy here was the national champion from, I want to say 2013. He was unbelievable to watch play this sport because he has a visual impairment and because he says that he found it relatively easy to figure out where the balls were on the court. Whereas if I was to play him, he would absolutely destroy me because he has much better use of his tactile senses than I do. But yeah, he could feel on the board it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 meters away, and it's right in front of me. And there are some balls in front, so I might want to choose a lob shot over the top. It was down to that kind of level of detail. So there are some adaptations that we can do, some things that I found useful when delivering this to groups or individuals. And those of you who work with people with visual impairments, again, you'll probably see a lot of similarities here to anything else that you have delivered, because we've got to think of a different way to communicate. So noise cues, tapping on the floor or clapping or a metronome by the target ball, so by the jack ball, been quite useful. Having it consistent has really helped. So the same noise for each time, perhaps just moving around the court to where the target is. Again, these are recreational adaptations that we can do in training and in practice. Second one, colored card behind the jack. So some people might struggle with seeing the ball. You know, we've got a 10-meter playing area. The ball could be 9.8 meters away from them. That's pretty much a badminton court, and that's a fairly long distance. So if somebody is able to see, put a black piece of card behind the jack, folded into a triangle, sometimes helps, so it stays where it is. Might just increase the contrast of the white versus the black for the player to be able to see and therefore play independently. This is for people who are partially sighted. Colourful cones up the side of the court. So again, if people can see some colours better than others, then that can help them gauge distance. So you know that your grid lines are 1 meter apart. You might choose to have cones up the side of the court 1 meter apart to help them to gauge. Also really helps the sports assistants to learn where the pegs have gone in relation to the court markings. So verbal descriptions of ball positioning. Some people like to use a clock face from where they're sat. That works for some people. Others like to talk about number of paces. Others might choose to talk about number of footsteps away. But if we can describe it's this many meters away and it's to your left 2 meters, you know, can we be really specific with our verbal description? Having a quiet environment really helps. So I'd suggest if we're delivering a VI Boccia session, we have a group of people with a visual impairment in the room, then not playing basketball in the next court, not having 100 kids doing tiny tots or whatever it might be in the next space in the leisure centre would be really helpful. Just helps people to be able to concentrate a little bit more. Use balls with high contrast colors. So we know we've got a white jack, we've got a red versus blue scenario with 6 red and 6 blue balls. There's nothing to say that jack shouldn't be spray painted bright yellow. You know, we can be creative in our coaching environment to make sure it works for them. You might not want to use eye shades. You don't have to, obviously. Some people can find that quite daunting if they're partially sighted and we're taking away the last bit of their sight. People might be a bit unnerved by it, so don't feel pressured to use the eye shades when we're just training. This is an area that we'll talk about a little bit more later on, but we can guide players onto courts or they can come out to see. In the international rules of Boccia, then once the referee signals for that player's colour to play, then they can enter the court and they can go around and have a look at the balls as they choose. It's their time. So we can encourage the players to go onto court and have a look. What we would say from a safety aspect is make sure that they're not going to step on other people's balls. Firstly, your opponent might get quite upset if you have other people kicking the balls further away from the jack. And equally, we don't want any ankles going over during your sessions either. so we can guide them onto court if required. Throw down markers on the throwing line. So we know that the rules of boccia say that you have to be inside of your box in order to play, and you have to be seated. Having throw down markers for the throwing line where they can feel with their feet in front of them if they're sitting down. Something in front of them can help to show them where the box is if they can't actually see it. Excuse me. It's not COVID, don't worry. So we're going to go into our first breakout room. George is going to put you into groups of probably 4. We'll give you 5 minutes to have a think about the considerations when coaching.
That was it, 5 minutes you wanted?
Yeah, 5 minutes. I'll give you a chance to get a proper drink as well. But the considerations when coaching. So I'll give you one to start with. Excuse me. So be aware of the noise is one. 5 minutes, please, George. Great. So your question was, I hope you heard it through my little coughing attack there. You're probably glad that we're on a Zoom and not in person after that. Yeah, things we need to consider when we're coaching people with a visual impairment. And the first one that I gave you was around being aware of the noise within the environment. Are there any others that you came up with in your group? You can shout out or put them in the chat, whatever works for you guys. Anything that we need to consider when coaching someone with a visual impairment?
Make sure you understand, or the client understands what you're trying to say to them. Don't use big words that they may not know. Work with them rather than try and impart our own ideas all the time. Then feel comfortable.
Yeah, making them feel comfortable is huge, hugely important. I think that's a really important coaching skill, regardless of whatever disability or someone who's non-disabled as well. Yeah, good point. Anybody else?
So we came up with quite a few actually. We had just double check your facilities and your accessibility, tactile toilet, toilet signs, and are they clearly marked? Is there any trip hazards? Drop curves, that sort of stuff. I know that's the facilities, but just double check it maybe on your intro to session. We've got in our sort of setup like lights in the sports hall that we can sort of, there's like 3 options: on, off, or slightly dull. There's a couple of options, and then similar to what Michael was saying, just get to know your people really, find out who they are, what they're about, try and ask them about the day, ask them where they're going after that session, just that type of stuff.
It's relationship building, isn't it? That's good. Good people coaching.
Yeah, and then our sort of last one we talked about was reflections and feedback. Is what the session was 12 weeks ago. Is it where they thought it was going? Did they want it to go to a different avenue or different way than you're setting your scheme of work?
Yeah, great. Yeah, let's involve them in that process. It's going to be more powerful. Yeah, good. I like it. Anybody else have any ideas on this one? If not, I'll give you a few of mine to think about. This is one of the things that I found most useful when going. I did a series of going around the visually impaired colleges around the UK, around England, and using the players' names. So important for getting people's attention in especially in a group setting, and introducing yourself by name as well, so they get to know you. I didn't go to any of those sessions without a roll of sticky tabs and a permanent marker to put their names on their jacket, because I was meeting 50 kids each week and getting to know all their names. I'm not bad with names, but I'm not 50 kids a week good with remembering people's names. So making sure that they all had a name tag on them so that they could, I knew when I needed to get their attention was really useful. In coaching, then certainly my go-to style is to do demonstrations. I like to be quite visual, and that's not something that works so well in this space. So being able to not rely on demonstrations for technical feedback. So instead of demonstrating an underarm throw, you might want them to throw like a dart, but actually for somebody who has no sight, then they're not going to know necessarily what my demonstration of a dart throw or an underarm looks like. So we need to help verbalize it and show them in a different way. Speak clearly and succinctly and paint a picture with our words. I think we need to be able to be creative and be able to speak in a way that helps people to understand rather than confuse. So let's paint a picture of what that boccia court looks like. Alex made a great point earlier in one of the groups just around them knowing the size of the court and being able to familiarize themselves with the area. So if we can paint a picture with our words, that will really help with being able to help them to play the sport. Tell the player when you're moving away. If you're working with someone who's either wearing eye shades or somebody that has no sight, then tell them when we're finished. Just say, no, I'm going to go and work with James now. Dave, let me know how you're getting on, and I'll come back and see you in 5 minutes. I'm going to go and work with James. Tell them when you're moving away. We can offer to guide the player onto court so that they can get a better view of the balls. Let's not assume that they have no sight. The majority of people probably that you'll see come to these sorts of sessions, or people that you may be working with already, will maybe have some form of sight, not necessarily have no sight. And equipment should be easily reachable. The picture that's on the slide now is a really good example of this. And again, this is probably one of my top tips for a session. When you're setting up at the start, make sure the boccia balls are at the bottom of the chair leg so that the player can tactilely, I'm not sure if that's a word, but they can feel down the chair leg and they can feel the balls at the bottom of where the chair is. Then they know where they are. There's not 2 balls underneath their feet. There's not 3 balls on their right and 1 on their left, or behind them in the box. That's a lot harder to get. So it makes your session run a lot more smoothly if you position the balls all in the same place at the bottom of that chair leg where they're easily in reach and they can feel towards the position where they are. So those are a few things to consider when we're coaching the VI boccia. Some of these may or may not be in the pop quiz. So using eye shades can be daunting. So we don't need to enforce it. The young lady in the picture here is wearing eye shades because she was a competitive player, but it isn't necessary for more of a development or a community session. So I want to talk a little bit about guiding. Again, I'm sure those of you who answered my poll and said that you have experience of this will have done a lot of this. But as a VI boccia coach, we should, or leader, we should encourage people to come on to court to assess the position. I'd encourage that whether we're talking VI boccia or Paralympic pathway. Boccia, it doesn't really matter. I'd encourage players to come onto court and have a look, because you get a different angle. You can see things a little bit more clearly. A 5 centimeter gap from the back of the court might look like a foot from next to it. So, encourage them to come to court. So this is general guiding advice, this is pretty broad brush, but can be applied to boccia and to this setting. So introduce yourself and ask if help is needed. We shouldn't assume that people need help. Or if they want it, but it's important to introduce yourself and ask them if it is needed. You should offer your elbow or shoulder for the participant to take hold of. It's not you taking hold of them, it's them taking hold of you. I think the difference there is quite important. They're in control, you're just supporting. I think my wife heard me coughing and brought me a nice hot drink. So apologies for taking a sip of that. So we don't link arms with the person that we're guiding. Reason being that if we fall over, then they're going to fall over as well, and vice versa. So that we don't need to be linking arms and holding on really tight. Because boccia is a seated sport, then we spend a lot of time standing up and sitting down in a session. So place your hand on the back of the chair and allow the person to follow you as or their guide and find the chair. One thing I didn't I saw a few times people guides sitting people down into chairs using hands on shoulders. Again, we're trying to support and guide rather than enforce that this is what where they need to be. Another way to support that process is to tap the chair so that they can feel where it is themselves, and you can verbally describe it as well. Here's your chair, tap the chair, and they can sit down themselves. Again, it's about independence here. We need to keep your guiding arm still and relaxed. You might not be too relaxed the first time you do this, but if you can, if you're holding someone's arm and they're tensed up and they're really rigid, they're going to feel that stress and they're going to worry that that you don't know what you're doing, even if you do. So try and keep your arm relaxed when guiding somebody. It just helps to keep the whole process more friendly. Right, this is another activity for you guys to go into in your groups. I'm going to give you a bit longer for this one. And what I'm looking for.
Can I just add something to that?
A question, yeah.
Always ask the person being guided which side they want you to link arms with, as that way, you know, if you're going through a doorway or something like that, you don't want them being knocked by the door or anything like that. So ask them, would you prefer the right side or the left side? Sometimes it depends on whether they're right or left-handed, but that's something that I picked up in another training course.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Alex. It's a good point. Okay, introductory boccia session. You've got a new group of people in front of you. You want to introduce this sport to them. You've got to design a session to do that. And what I'm looking for from your group is 5 steps of things that you would do to take people through an introductory session. So 5 steps from them coming into your space to finishing that session. It's maybe half an hour of an introductory session. What 5 steps would you go through to introduce them to this sport of visually impaired boccia? Was there a question? I can see a hand up.
Got her hand up.
Aniska?
Yes, sorry, just a curiosity, really. Would you ask individual what is their level of sight?
I think it depends on the person and depends on the relationship as well. So if it's someone that you're familiar with, then you might want to sit down beforehand and have that conversation. It wouldn't probably be the first question I would ask, because we want to empower people to be able to go through the process like another participant would. But yeah, I think it's important to get to know them. And so if they say, yeah, you know what, I can't see anything, then actually that's quite helpful. And equally, if they say, you could ask them, there's a ball at the end of the court, 8 meters away, can you see it? Again, that's going to help you. So I'd say it's probably part of building that relationship. It's a good question, but something to kind of develop through rapport. So we're not interrogating, but we're discovering.
Thank you.
Okay. So I reckon, George, if we go for 10 minutes, on this, 5 steps just to introduce to a new group of people VI boccia. 10 minutes. Any questions about what we're doing? I'll say it one more time just for clarity. 5 steps to introduce this sport of VI boccia, given what we know about the sport and what we know about the equipment so far. To this, what do we think step one might be? Anybody willing or brave enough to give us a step one?
I think it was to find out their aims. Yeah, what they're here for. They're here because they've got to be here because they've been forced to go, encouraged to go. Do they want to play boccia? And that was it. Just really establishing why they're here anyway. And then
if somebody says, no, I don't want to be here, where do we go from there, coach?
Well, I would say, well, the best thing is to watch and have a look, and then we'll make a decision from there. If you know what you're talking about necessarily, if you don't know what it is, and you don't know, you just got to have a look and see. That's what we always do anyway at school. So,
Oh, cool.
Look their feet on it. The visually impaired might not be able to see to watch. Sorry.
Well, I was thinking that.
That's a nice thing about the grid. So we've had players or people in sessions before like that, and you can give them the grid with somebody sat next to them who is sighted, and they can plot the grid so that they can watch the game by feeling the grid. So if you have equipment to do that, then they might want to spectate with the sport assistant plotting where the grid is, so they can kind of show them what does gameplay look like. So there can be an observational tool there as well. Great. I think that it was Alex that jumped the gun in terms of session planning. He talked about walking around the court to familiarize with the area. Tell us a bit more about why you would do that, Alex.
So it's more knowing about getting them to feel the court, because you can verbally explain something to them, but then make it more tactile, more engaging for them. So knowing where the back line is, knowing where the V line is. So we all know that the jack ball has to go over the V line. So trying to, rather than trying to always explain it to them, try and say, right, get them to feel with their feet where the lines are. Like, can they feel the tape on the floor? And so get them to go all the way around the court so they can really feel the distance, because we all perceive distances in a different way.
Yeah, that's a great point. If I say the court's 10 meters, someone might think about 12, 13, 14 meters. Other people might think that's, I don't know, 3 paces away. So yeah, if we can do it and make it relative to them to go, yeah, it's 4 of your paces up to the V line, which is actually 3 meters away, then you can start to describe it. So I think familiarizing with the area and with the courts are a good starting point. Can you guys see the screen?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so a few steps that have been useful for me. Again, this is the nice thing that coaches have come up with different ways to do this. This is a few ways that that I found useful when delivering. So introducing the game verbally. So very briefly, Boccia is a game whereby you play red against blue, and you're trying to get as close to the jack ball, which is white, as you can. And you get a point for every ball that is closer than your opponent. That takes 10 seconds. Allow the players to familiarize themselves with the court by walking the area and describing the dimensions. Now, as a coach or as a leader, we'll probably know that the playing area is 10 meters, that the cross is right in the middle of the court at 5 meters away, and the top of the V is 3 meters away. And as I said, the jack has to go over the V. So it's important to warm up. These guys are potentially not always that active, then let's do a bit of an active warm up with them. So throwing balls towards the coach's feet with a sound cue is a good way for you as a coach to see how people throw by default. Do they automatically go for an overarm or an underarm? They might not be sure which they could do, and just gives them the freedom to explore. So if they're throwing towards your feet, I would start short at 3 meters and start to describe that that's where the jack ball has to go past. You're playing past that point. Then move around the court and have a bit of a fun with it. And say you're standing on the cross right in the middle of the court. They throw a couple of balls towards your feet, and that can all happen at the same time. Showing them the grid. Now, some players take to this really quickly, like the national champ that I described to you earlier, but other people take a bit longer. So if we can put the grid on their lap and just explain to them with their hand, and always ask permission if you're going to take their hand to show them something on the grid. You could say, Greg, do you mind if I show you where the target ball is on the grid, where the jack ball is? And if he says yes, then you could show him where it is on the grid with his finger and count the lines back towards him. So if it's right on the cross, you're going to count 5 lines on the grid because they're a meter squared back to where he is sitting. And that's one way to explain. Make sure they know what the red and the blue pegs feel like. The red are smooth and the blue are rough. And explain how to interpret the grid. And that's where the lines come into it. This 6 meters wide by 10 meters long. You could play an end if they get all of that stuff and they understand the premise, and you think that the group is kind of following and following along the lines that you want them to. You could play an end with the grid, with the eye shades. We wouldn't put any time limitation on that, but further down the line, then matches will likely be timed. So that's a process that I found worked pretty well with groups. Depending on the group, if you have a really high ability group, then you could go through that pretty quickly. If you have a lower ability group, or a mixed ability group, then it might take a little longer. In the first session, you might only get to throwing balls to noise cues at feet and describing what the sport of boccia is all about. That's fine. And it might be session 2 that you have to introduce the grid and go, this is the grid, this is how we work. Let's do a session around that. So this is a kind of a stock 5-step process, but you're gonna have to break it down depending on your guys. And equally, this is the thing I love about coaching, is that there are so many weird and wonderful ways to skin the metaphorical cat, and everybody finds their own way to go about it. So we've come to the, any questions about that session before we move on? Are there any steps in there that you think we've missed, or anything that you think we need to, that you want to recap?
Sorry, I think we might have misunderstood what we were doing. I thought it was a session where people who had never ever played boccia before came.
Yep, go on.
So I think I would rather have sort of got the people actually just working through lobbing the balls a bit and then explaining about the game itself.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's absolutely fine. And I think that having that, introduction to equipment, they might never have held a boccia ball before. So that familiarization with the equipment, in fact, it's a throwing game. That's a really important part. If with your group, then you wanted to flip those 2 steps, that's absolutely fine. I think the way I went through this was just to go, boccia is a throwing sport. We stay in our seats. You play 6 red balls against 6 blue balls, and you're aiming for the jack. That's probably as far as I would go verbally, and then I would go into chucking, familiarizing with the court, but then chucking balls. So this is, like I said, the nice thing about coaching is that let's try different ways, and different things will work for your group than work for the next group of people. So yeah, lots of different ways to do this. And what I hope is that those 5 steps I put on there give you somewhat of a framework for how you might deliver that introductory session. But this isn't a set thing. As with coaching as a whole, you can find your own creative way to go about it for your group. Any other questions? Anything you want to discuss?
I don't have question as such, but with the last one with the eye shades, because I deliver mostly with the social club, so it's not as a competition, and we have like volunteers in there, so I always encourage volunteers to wear the eye shades, and our members seems really enjoy that they have like the same kind of chances to play and make them more connected with each other.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. It's so powerful. And yeah, that's the nice thing. You know, you could, I could have a match against somebody with more or less visual ability than me, and we'd have an even match if we're wearing eye shades. So I think that's a really good point. One thing I would say, health and safety wise, if we are going to put eye shades on various different people, is make sure they're washed and make sure they're disinfected and clean, because the last thing we want is for to be passing on any sort of eye infections or anything like that. But it's a really good point. Yeah, get people playing. I love playing VI Boccia. I would happily play this sport if there was a competitive pathway for me. It's hard, and actually, I've lost more times than I've won against people with visual impairments, which is awesome. Anything else that you want? Anyone else came up with that wanted to ask or chat through at this stage? No. Okay. So
There is
quiz.
just there is just a quick one.
Yeah.
The notes we've been through tonight that you've had up, you know, that we've been ready. Will they be available online or after the session that we can then download ourselves and use as guidance when we start designing our programs and all?
So I think George was going to make the session recording available to download via a link. Is that right, George?
Yeah, it's been recorded, so it will either be put up as a private YouTube video or a retransfer. Either way, everybody. And I'll also email out everybody probably next week now. And I can, if it's helpful, I can attach a copy of the slides. If that's okay with you, Matt, what is to be said.
Oh, thanks, George.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the fun time of the evening is about to start. Pop quiz for you. If you've got the chat function there, there's going to be a multiple choice, an A or a B answer to it. If I could ask you to put an A or a B in the chat for your answer, that would be great. Fastest fingers on the buzzer. If you like, let's make this like sport, if we can. So get ready to press an A or a B in that chat for your first question, which is, as a VI Boccia coach, we should paint a picture with our words and not rely solely on demonstrations. A, true, B, false.
Where's B gone?
There's a lot of A's coming through there, which is great. We cannot rely just on demonstration, and yeah, we need to be creative with our words and paint a picture. Okay, question number 2, fingers on the buzzers. Are the red pegs smooth or rough in texture? A, rough, B, smooth. The red pegs on the VI Boccia grid. They are.
I've lost it.
The red pegs are smooth in texture.
Yeah.
So B, well done. Question number 3. Where should boccia balls be placed before they've been played? A, within the reach of the player where they cannot be kicked onto court. B, behind the chair.
A.
Who was first? Hard to tell with so many on there. Yeah, A. Let's keep the balls at the bottom of the chair so they can feel down the chair leg and they know exactly where those balls are. Question number 3, fingers on the buzzers. We should always ask if someone needs help rather than assume that they do. A, true.
A.
B, false.
A, true.
A, true. Let's ask. Great. I think we have one more question. Blind or partially sighted people can compete in the Heathcote Cup within the BC7 classification? A, true, B, false.
True.
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 Yeah.
Absolutely, they can. Good work. 100%, I reckon, guys. Well done.
Thank you.
Okay. There's a resource which I think you guys have received that's got a lot of this information in already. It's also a downloadable link, I think, on the Boccia England website, where a lot of this information is held and available.
From George's as well.
What was that? Sorry, Carol.
It was included in the link that we had.
Yeah, great. So yeah, there's loads of good information there that we've covered tonight, which should help with your delivery and planning. So any questions, anything that people want to ask at this stage, then feel free to ask. There are a few links on the next page, but I think you've been sent all of those already. And the electronic resource, yeah, it is available. There's more information on the Boccia England website.
This is a certificate of attendance to say that I've got a record of who's attended tonight. Would you be able to put your name and our email address in the chat box? And next week when I'm producing the certificates, I know who to write it to and where to send it to. That'd be really helpful.
So what do you want everybody's email address?
Everybody's name and email address. Who don't mind putting in the chat box.
If you want a certificate, guys, then pop your name and email address in the chat box. That would be great. And I guess you'll have them probably through the applications for the program as well.
Yeah, I think there are some people on here that are from organisation.
Okay.
But didn't apply direct. Some other people applied on behalf of their organisation.
Okay, fair. So yeah, there is a certificate of attendance for this evening. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If there's anything that you want to ask, then feel free to come off mute or write a question in the chat if you want to. But otherwise, I'm sure that George may be able to field questions in the coming weeks if there's anything that really springs out that you want to ask. Alex, you got a question?
Yeah, I was just saying on a personal thing, as someone who plays in regular boccia anyway, competition levels, is there a way of getting into competition, like VI boccia competitions anyway, even though like regionally I'm in the southeast and most of those games are usually Midlands and North, as I did when I was in Hereford. So
well, what's your
so it's just is there a way of getting into those competitions even though I'm in the southeast, or do I have to be in the Midlands or in the North to do them?
No, you can enter any UK Cup competition regardless of either end. But I think it's currently you can enter 2 UK rounds per season. So it could be Midlands, North, West and South. But it doesn't matter where they are based, you can enter any competition. You got the UK Cup happening in Kettering a week on Saturday the 21st. And I spoke to my colleague Daniel earlier, and there are still spaces available at that UK Cup in Kettering, and you can apply for that for Sport 80 on the Boccia England website.
If that answers your question, Alex. So yeah, enter any of them.
Right.
All of them.
Right, thanks for that.
Is there anything else that anybody would like to ask before we sign off? I'll let you enjoy the rest of your evenings.
And I'll follow up with everybody next week the certificate and next steps as part of the project. But like I said, you should all have my email address. Any issues, any questions that you have about your sessions about VR Boccia, just drop me an email and me or one of my colleagues I'll be happy to support.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Right, thank you.
Thank you for coming tonight,
Thank
everybody.
you.
No
Thank
problem.
you. See you
Thanks for
later.
your attention. See you later, guys.